The sun beat down mercilessly on the dry Wyoming soil as Zara Holloway wiped sweat from her brow with a dirt-stained sleeve, refusing to quit despite the blisters forming on her palms. It was 1879, and while most women in Cottonwood Springs spent their days cooking, cleaning, and minding children, Zara had other responsibilities, ones that earned her nothing but scorn from the townsfolk who believed a woman's place was anywhere but the fields. "Look at her out there again, dressed like a farmhand," Mildred Peterson's voice carried across the fence line as she passed with her shopping basket. "No wonder she can't find herself a husband." Zara pretended not to hear as she continued hoeing the stubborn earth. At 22, she was already considered a spinster by most, but that was the least of her concerns. After her father's death last winter, the responsibility of their modest farm had fallen entirely on her shoulders. Her mother's health was failing, and her younger siblings needed to be fed. What choice did she have? "You keep digging in that dirt like a man, Zara Holloway, and you'll end up alone forever," called another woman, triggering laughter from her companions. Zara straightened her back, adjusting the wide-brimmed hat that shielded her face from the sun. The cruel words stung, but she couldn't afford the luxury of caring what others thought. Not when survival was at stake. "I'd rather be alone than married to any of your sorry husbands," she shouted back, immediately regretting the outburst. Such remarks only cemented her reputation as that wild Holloway girl. As the women huffed away in scandalized whispers, Zara returned to her work. The farm wasn't much: 15 acres of struggling crops, a small apple orchard, 6 chickens, 2 milk cows, and an aging plow horse named Samson. But it was everything to her family. That evening, as Zara trudged back to the modest farmhouse, she noticed a dust cloud approaching from the east. Riders, 3 of them moving at a steady pace. Visitors were rare out this way, especially with the railroad having bypassed Cottonwood Springs for the larger settlement of Riverton 30 miles north. She waited by the fence post, one hand shielding her eyes against the setting sun. As they drew closer, she recognized Sheriff Mills in the lead, accompanied by 2 strangers. One was dressed in a fine suit that seemed entirely impractical for the dusty trail. The other wore the practical garb of a working cowboy, worn leather chaps, a faded blue shirt, and a hat pulled low over his face. "Evening, Miss Holloway," Sheriff Mills called as they reined in their horses. "Got someone here interested in buying up some of the properties in these parts. This here's Mr. Franklin from the Wyoming Land and Cattle Company." He gestured to the suit-wearing man. "And this is his surveyor, Mr. Xavier Odell." The cowboy tipped his hat, revealing a tanned face with striking blue eyes that seemed to take her measure in a single glance. "Madam," he said simply, his voice deep and resonant. "We're not selling," Zara said firmly, crossing her arms over her chest. Mr. Franklin cleared his throat. "Miss Holloway, I understand your attachment to your family's land, but surely you must realize that a woman alone can't possibly manage." "I'm managing just fine," she interrupted, bristling at his condescending tone. Sheriff Mills looked uncomfortable. "Zara, maybe you should at least hear what they're offering. Times are hard, and with your mother's condition." $25 an acre, Mr. Franklin said, smoothing his mustache. "That's more than fair given the condition of the land." Zara nearly choked. The farm was worth at least twice that, even in its current state. "The answer is no. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have chores to finish before dark." As she turned to leave, she caught Xavier Odell studying her with an unreadable expression. Unlike Franklin, there was no condescension in his gaze, only curiosity, and perhaps something like respect. "Your south field needs attention," he said suddenly, pointing to the area Zara had been struggling with all week. "Soil's depleted. You're fighting a losing battle there." Zara stopped, turning back slowly. "I know that, Mr. Odell. I plan to let it lie fallow next season. A slight smile crossed his face. Good thinking, though you might consider planting clover this fall. Puts nitrogen back in the soil. Before she could respond, Franklin cleared his throat impatiently. We should continue our survey before we lose the light, Odell. The cowboy nodded, but his eyes lingered on Zara for a moment longer. Madam, he said again, touching the brim of his hat before following the others down the road. Zara watched them go, puzzled by the strange encounter. Something about Xavier Odell's direct gaze made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before, not as a curiosity or an oddity, but as a person worthy of notice. The next morning dawned cooler than usual, a blessed relief as Zara headed to the fields. She paused at the sight of someone already there, a tall figure working with a hoe at the far end of the troublesome south field. As she approached, Xavier Odell straightened up, wiping his brow. He'd already turned over a significant portion of soil, working with the efficient movements of someone who knew farming well. Mr. Odell, she said cautiously, what are you doing on my land? Helping, he replied simply. And it's Xavier, if you don't mind. Zara frowned, suspicion immediately rising. If this is some trick to get me to sell, it's not. He leaned on the hoe, studying her with those direct blue eyes. Franklin headed back to Riverton this morning. I told him I had other business to attend to. And that business is working my field? Zara asked, bewildered. Xavier smiled slightly. I saw how the townsfolk treated you yesterday. Heard what they said as we rode in. He gestured to the hoe in his hands. Thought you might appreciate an extra pair of hands is all. Zara didn't know how to respond. Help was something she desperately needed but rarely received. Why would you do that? She asked finally. You don't even know me. I know what it's like to fight alone against impossible odds, he said quietly, and I respect anyone who does it with their head held high. He paused, then added, besides, there's something about a woman who isn't afraid to work the land that I find admirable. Zara felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. No one had ever described her work as admirable before. Well, she said, trying to sound businesslike, I can't pay you anything. Wasn't asking for payment, Xavier replied, already returning to his work. Though I wouldn't turn down a meal if you're offering. Despite her reservations, Zara found herself working alongside him throughout the morning. Xavier was surprisingly knowledgeable about farming techniques, offering suggestions that made sense without being condescending. By midday, they had accomplished what would have taken her 3 days alone. Where did you learn so much about farming? She asked as they paused to drink water from the well. Grew up on a farm in Missouri, he replied, pouring water over his head to cool off. Left when I was 17. Been working cattle drives and odd jobs since then. And now you're a surveyor for land companies? There was skepticism in her voice. Xavier's expression turned guarded. It pays the bills. For now. They worked side by side for the rest of the day, falling into a comfortable rhythm. Xavier told stories of places he'd seen: the vast open ranges of Texas, the towering mountains of Colorado, the bustling cattle towns of Kansas. Zara found herself laughing more than she had in months. When her younger siblings, Thomas and Emma, returned from school, they regarded Xavier with wide-eyed curiosity. He won them over quickly by showing Thomas how to whittle a small wooden horse and listening patiently to Emma's recitation of her multiplication tables. After a simple but hearty supper, Xavier declined Zara's offer to stay in their barn for the night. Got a room at the boarding house in town, he explained, but I'll be back tomorrow, if that's all right with you. Why? Zara couldn't help asking. You've already done more than enough. Xavier looked at her steadily. Because those fields need work, and you could use the help. He paused, then added more softly. And because I'd like to. True to his word, Xavier returned the next day, and the day after that. Word spread quickly through town that the Holloway woman had a man working her fields, sparking fresh gossip. Some suggested he was a drifter taking advantage of a desperate woman. Others whispered that Zara had finally found someone as odd as herself. "Don't let them bother you," Xavier said when he noticed Zara's tense expression after a particularly unpleasant encounter with the minister's wife in town. "People fear what they don't understand." "And what don't they understand about me?" Zara asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. "That a woman can be strong and capable without diminishing herself," he replied, helping her load supplies into their wagon. "That there's dignity in working the land, no matter who's doing it." Zara studied him, trying to reconcile this thoughtful cowboy with the rough men she'd encountered before. "You're not like most men I've met, Xavier Odell." He grinned, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "I'll take that as a compliment, Miss Holloway." As the days stretched into weeks, Xavier became a fixture at the Holloway farm. He repaired the leaking roof, rebuilt the chicken coop, and helped bring in the modest harvest. Zara's mother, initially suspicious, grew to appreciate his respectful manner and the way he entertained the children with stories in the evenings. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant orange and purple, Zara finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why are you really here, Xavier? Surely you have better places to be than helping a struggling farm family." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his profile outlined against the fading light. "I told you I was a surveyor for the Wyoming Land and Cattle Company," he said finally. "That wasn't entirely true." Zara tensed. "What do you mean?" "I was hired to identify vulnerable properties, farms that might be struggling, owners who might sell cheap." He turned to face her, his expression troubled. "Companies like Franklin's are buying up small farms all over the territory, using whatever tactics necessary. And I was one of your targets?" Zara said flatly, feeling a cold knot form in her stomach. "Initially, yes," Xavier admitted. "But then I saw you standing up to those women, working your land despite everything. And I couldn't do it." He ran a hand through his hair. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Zara. But I couldn't be part of pushing someone like you off your land." Zara absorbed this, unsure whether to feel betrayed or grateful for his honesty. "So what happens now? Will Franklin send someone else?" "Probably. But I've been thinking about that." Xavier leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Your farm has potential, Zara. The orchard especially could be profitable with some work. But you need capital to make improvements." "I'm barely keeping food on the table," Zara pointed out. "There's no money for improvements." "What if we formed a partnership?" Xavier suggested. "I've saved some money from my work. Enough to invest in better equipment, maybe some more livestock." Zara stared at him, surprised. "You want to be my business partner?" "I want to put down roots somewhere that matters," Xavier said quietly. "Somewhere with people who matter." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Zara looked away, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how the fading light softened his features. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. Xavier nodded, respecting her caution. "Of course." The next day, while Xavier was in town purchasing supplies, Sheriff Mills rode up to the farm. His expression was grave as he dismounted. "Zara, I thought you should know. There's talk in town that Xavier Odell isn't who he claims to be." A man passing through recognized him as someone who worked for cattle barons in Colorado doing whatever dirty work needed doing to drive small ranchers off their land. Zara's heart sank. Despite Xavier's confession, she'd wanted to believe in his genuine change of heart. "He told me he used to work for companies like that," she said defensively. The sheriff looked skeptical. Did he tell you about the Hanson family in Colorado? Their barn mysteriously burned down after they refused to sell. Or the Coopers, whose water source suddenly got contaminated. He sighed. I'm not saying he did those things himself, but he ran with people who did. After the sheriff left, Zara paced the farmyard, her thoughts in turmoil. When Xavier returned, his smile faded as he noticed her troubled expression. What's wrong? He asked, setting down the supplies. Sheriff Mills came by, Zara said, watching his reaction carefully. He had some interesting stories about your time in Colorado. Xavier's face paled, but he didn't look away. I figured my past would catch up eventually. Did you do those things, Xavier? Did you hurt people to drive them off their land? No, he said firmly, but I didn't stop it either. I stood by and collected my pay while others did the dirty work. His voice was heavy with regret. That's why I left. I couldn't live with myself anymore. Zara wanted to believe him. More than that, she realized with a jolt, she wanted him to stay. In just a few short weeks, Xavier had become someone she looked forward to seeing each day. Someone who made her laugh, who saw her strength rather than mocking her for it. I understand if you want me to leave, Xavier said quietly when she didn't respond. I wouldn't blame you. Zara took a deep breath. I don't want you to leave, she admitted. But I need to know I can trust you, Xavier. My family depends on this farm. I can't risk everything on someone who might disappear or worse. Xavier stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. I've been running for a long time, Zara. From my past, from myself. But being here, working beside you, it's the first time in years I've felt like I might be worthy of something good. He hesitated, then continued softly. The first time I felt like I could be the man my father raised me to be, before I lost my way. Something in his vulnerability touched Zara deeply. She'd seen him work tirelessly for weeks, asking nothing in return. She'd watched him teach Thomas and Emma with infinite patience, treat her mother with gentle respect. One chance, she said finally. That's all I can offer. Relief flooded his face. That's all I'm asking for. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to the farm. True to his word, Xavier invested in a new plow, better seeds, and 2 young milk cows. Together, they expanded the vegetable garden and pruned the neglected apple trees. For the first time since her father's death, Zara began to believe the farm might not just survive but thrive. The town's gossip continued, but now took on a different tone. Speculation about Xavier's past mingled with whispers about his relationship with Zara. Some still disapproved, but others, particularly the younger women, regarded Zara with newfound curiosity. A woman who worked the fields had caught the attention of a handsome cowboy. Perhaps there was something to her independence after all. One Sunday after church, Mrs. Winters, whose husband owned the general store, approached Zara. I was wondering if you might be interested in selling some of your vegetables at our store, she said, avoiding Xavier's gaze. Customers have been asking for fresh produce, and the quality of what you brought in last week was excellent. Zara was stunned by the offer. Yes, I would be interested. Thank you. As they walked home, Xavier nudged her shoulder playfully. See, they're starting to come around. Zara smiled, but doubt still lingered. Only because we're doing better. Success has a way of changing people's minds. Maybe, Xavier conceded. Or maybe they're just finally seeing what I saw from the beginning. His words warmed her, as did the gentle touch of his hand against hers, a touch that was happening more frequently as the days passed. They hadn't spoken openly about the growing feelings between them, but Zara felt it in every shared glance, every brush of fingers, every conversation that stretched late into the evening. One crisp autumn day, as they worked together harvesting apples, Zara found herself studying Xavier as he reached for a high branch. The sun caught in his dark hair, now grown a bit longer since his arrival. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms tanned by months of outdoor work. "You're staring," he said without turning around, a smile in his voice. Zara blushed, caught. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since you rode up with Franklin that day." Xavier climbed down from the ladder, setting his basket of apples aside. "Good changes, I hope?" "Mostly," Zara admitted with a small smile, "though I could do without being the subject of town gossip." "Let them talk," Xavier said, stepping closer. "I've never cared much what others think." "Is that why you're still here?" Zara asked, suddenly needing to know. "Working a small farm when you could be anywhere?" Xavier reached out, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "I'm here because nowhere else feels right anymore. Because the thought of leaving." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "The thought of not seeing you every day is something I can't bear to consider." Zara's heart hammered in her chest. "Xavier," before she could continue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. 3 riders appeared at the edge of the orchard. Mr. Franklin from the Wyoming Land and Cattle Company, flanked by 2 rough-looking men Zara didn't recognize. Xavier immediately stepped in front of Zara, his posture tense. "Franklin," he said coldly, "didn't expect to see you again." Franklin dismounted, his expression smug. "Odell, I had a feeling you might have gotten distracted from your assignment." His gaze shifted to Zara. "Though I can't say I blame you. Miss Holloway is certainly a unique woman. What do you want?" Zara demanded, moving to stand beside Xavier rather than behind him. "The same thing I wanted before this land." Franklin gestured expansively. "Though I notice you've made some improvements. Perhaps I should adjust my offer accordingly." He smiled thinly. "Say, $30 an acre now?" "It's not for sale," Xavier stated firmly. "Not now, not ever." Franklin's smile faded. "I had hoped you might be reasonable, Odell. After all, you know how these things work." He nodded toward his companions. "These gentlemen can be very persuasive when necessary." Xavier's hand moved subtly toward his hip, where Zara knew he carried a revolver. "You're making a mistake, Franklin. This isn't Colorado. Sheriff Mills doesn't take kindly to intimidation tactics. Sheriff Mills is handling a disturbance on the other side of the county," Franklin said smoothly. "Most unfortunate timing." Zara felt cold fear grip her heart, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Franklin, I suggest you leave our property immediately." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "Our property? How interesting." He turned to Xavier. "You've certainly embedded yourself quickly, Odell. Tell me, does Miss Holloway know about your role in the Jenkins affair? Or how about the Wallace family?" Xavier paled slightly but stood his ground. "She knows enough." "Does she?" Franklin pressed. "Does she know you were the one who identified her farm as vulnerable in the first place? That you specifically suggested we target the stubborn woman trying to farm alone?" Zara felt as though she'd been struck. She looked at Xavier, silently pleading for him to deny it. "That was before I knew her," Xavier said quietly. "Before I understood what this place means to her and her family." "Very touching," Franklin sneered. "But sentiment doesn't change the facts. This land will be part of the Wyoming Land and Cattle Company holdings. The only question is whether you'll be compensated fairly or—" He let the threat hang in the air. Xavier stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not taking this farm, Franklin. Not while I'm standing." The tension was broken by the sound of a rifle being cocked. Everyone turned to see Zara's mother standing on the porch, her late husband's hunting rifle steady in her hands. Behind her stood Thomas and Emma, along with several of their neighbors, the blacksmith, the miller, and surprisingly, Mrs. Winters and her husband from the general store. I believe my daughter asked you to leave, Mrs. Holloway said firmly. Franklin looked around, realizing he was outnumbered. This isn't over, he warned, climbing back onto his horse. The company has ways of dealing with troublemakers. So does this town, Mr. Winters called out. We take care of our own. After Franklin and his men rode away, Zara turned to her neighbors in astonishment. How did you know? Xavier sent Thomas to fetch us when he spotted the riders coming, the blacksmith explained. Said there might be trouble. Mrs. Winters stepped forward, looking somewhat embarrassed. We haven't always been kind to you, Zara, but seeing how hard you and Xavier have worked, how you've never given up despite everything. She glanced at her husband, who nodded encouragingly. Well, we decided it's time we started being better neighbors. As the group dispersed with promises to keep watch for Franklin's return, Zara found herself alone with Xavier near the apple trees again. The golden afternoon light cast long shadows across the orchard they had restored together. You knew they were coming, she said, studying his face. Xavier nodded. I recognized one of Franklin's men in town yesterday. Figured they might try something. And what Franklin said about you targeting my farm specifically. Xavier's shoulders slumped slightly. It's true, he admitted. When I first came here, I was still working for them. I identified several properties, including yours. He met her gaze directly. But the moment I saw you standing up to those women, working this land with everything, you had something changed in me, Zara. I couldn't be that man anymore. Zara considered his words, weighing them against everything she'd seen from him over the past months. You could have left, she said finally. Gone somewhere Franklin wouldn't find you. I couldn't leave you, Xavier said simply. Not then, not now. The sincerity in his voice melted the last of Zara's reservations. She stepped closer, reaching for his hand. I'm glad you stayed. Xavier's fingers intertwined with hers. When I first saw you working these fields, I admired your strength. Then I came to admire your kindness, your determination, the way you care for your family. His voice grew softer. And now, Zara Holloway, I find myself loving everything about you. Zara's breath caught at the declaration. No one had ever looked at her the way Xavier was looking at her now, like she was precious and strong all at once. Like her hands calloused from labor were worthy of the gentlest touch. They mocked me for working the fields, she whispered. Said no man would want a woman who did a man's work. Xavier's smile was tender as he lifted her work-roughened hand to his lips. They were wrong. I don't want you despite your work in the fields, Zara. I love you because of it, because of who you are, all of you. He cupped her face gently. Work beside me forever, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Not as my wife who needs protection, but as my partner in everything. Let's build something here that's ours together. Tears pricked at Zara's eyes as she recognized the proposal for what it was, not an offer to save her, but an invitation to join forces, to be equals in life and love. Yes, she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. Yes, I'll work beside you, Xavier Odell, forever. When he kissed her, surrounded by the apple trees they had tended together, Zara felt something settle in her soul, a certainty that this man saw her truly, valued her strength rather than diminishing it. They were married that winter in the small church in Cottonwood Springs. The same townspeople who had once mocked Zara filled the pews, many now regarding her with newfound respect. Mrs. Winters had helped sew her wedding dress, and the blacksmith had fashioned simple gold bands for them both. Spring brought new life to the Holloway Odell farm. With Xavier's knowledge and Zara's determination, they expanded their operations, adding a small herd of cattle and planting new varieties of vegetables. Their produce became known as the finest in the county, and by summer, they had hired 2 local boys to help with the increased workload. Franklin made one more attempt to pressure them, filing dubious legal claims against their water rights. But the town rallied behind them, with Sheriff Mills personally ensuring the case was dismissed. The Wyoming Land and Cattle Company eventually turned its attention elsewhere, finding the united community too troublesome to fight. One evening, as the sun set over their flourishing fields, Xavier and Zara sat on the porch of their expanded farmhouse. Her head rested against his shoulder as they watched Thomas and Emma playing with the new puppy Xavier had brought home the week before. "I got a letter from the Agricultural College in Laramie today," Xavier said, stroking Zara's hair. "They're interested in our crop rotation methods. Want us to write about them for their journal." Zara smiled, placing his hand over her slightly rounded belly. At 30, she was expecting their first child, though Thomas and Emma, now teenagers, had been like their own children for years. "Professor and Mrs. Odell," she mused. "Who would have thought?" Xavier chuckled. "I prefer Farmer Odell, married to the most remarkable farmer's wife in Wyoming territory." "Partner," Zara corrected with a grin. "I believe someone once asked me to work beside him forever, not behind him." "The best decision I ever made," Xavier said, kissing her temple, "even if it did scandalize half the territory." Zara laughed, remembering the gossip that had eventually faded as their success grew. Now, other women in the area occasionally sought her advice on gardening or preserving, some even working their own small plots alongside their husbands. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Giving up the freedom of the open range for this life?" Xavier looked out over their land, the fields they had reclaimed, the orchard now heavy with ripening fruit, the sturdy barn they had built with their own hands. "This is freedom," he said softly. "Being exactly where I'm meant to be, with exactly who I'm meant to be with." He placed his hand over hers. "They mocked you for working the fields, Zara, but I thank God every day that's where I found you." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, watching the first stars appear above the land they had transformed through their partnership, a testament to what could grow when love and labor went hand in hand. When a woman's strength was valued rather than diminished. When a man found the courage to become his best self alongside the woman who inspired him. And in the fields that had once been a source of mockery, wildflowers now bloomed alongside the crops, beautiful and resilient, much like the love that had taken root there against all odds.